You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with Jacob Morrison.
Richard Trumka was the president of the AFLCIO. He is a former coal miner, a former lawyer for the United Mine Workers of America, and formerly the president of the United Mine Workers of America. He led the 9-month-long Pittston strike in 1989 and 90, a strike that included massive acts of civil disobedience that ultimately led to an absolutely astonishing $64 million of fines on the union and its membership. Some of those fines were dropped in exchange for a pledge of 10,000 hours of community service by union members, but much of it was not, and the union had to pay that. The strike did lead to a victory, though, that resulted in better health care and retirement plans for the miners. So given this history, it is, I believe, fitting that Brother Trumka's final act of service for the labor movement was a video that he sent to the mine workers at their rally on Wednesday, where more than 2,000 union members from across the country and union leaders spoke in support of these workers, representing teachers, government employees, port workers, steel workers, auto workers, and more. And we obtained the video from the UMWA and wanted to play it in its entirety here.
Hi, brothers and sisters. I'm Rich Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO, and I'm also president emeritus of the UMWA, proud third-generation coal miner, and a member of United Mine Workers Local 6290. And I stand with my brothers and sisters at Warrior Met. I stand with you today, I stand with you tomorrow, and I'll stand with you for as long as it takes to win a fair contract. And I want to say that your 12.5 million brothers and sisters of the labor movement will stand with you for as long as it takes for you to win a fair contract. When you've been working alongside your fellow workers 2 miles underground, when you've been watching each other's backs and fighting for your rights on the job, you truly trust and understand each other in a very, very fundamental way. You understand that because you've lived that. That's why you sacrifice so immensely for your communities in Alabama. And that's why you work tirelessly each and every day. And that's why you're on strike today. Warrior Met or BlackRock have never led the lives that we have. But it's time for them to recognize our reality, to pay us a fair wage, to provide us with good benefits, to give us a fair contract now. And nothing, I mean nothing less, is acceptable. And don't tell us that it's too much to ask for. Don't tell us that can't be done. You see, you, brothers and sisters, are the reason for Warrior's prosperity. And we will not sacrifice our dignity for their profit. And that, quite frankly, is what this strike is all about. Brothers and sisters banding together and demanding better. Better is what we need, and better is what we've earned. And better is what we will get if we make the PRO Act the law of the land. You see, for decades, big businesses and anti-worker politicians have chipped away at our rights. They've tried to take away our power. Well, I can tell you something. They won't win, and neither will Warrior Met. You see, it's time to regrow America's labor movement, to restore our rights, and to reclaim our power. It's time for a fair contract. To Warrior Met and all the union busters out there, no matter how much you try to intimidate us, no matter how hard you try to break us, working people are not going to give in or cave in or capitulate. We're not going to give in, and we won't give up. We will prevail. One day longer, one day stronger, we're one. God bless you. Take care. Solidarity forever.
that was Brother Richard Trumka's speech to the UMWA on Wednesday at what was billed as the largest labor rally in the history of Alabama. And like Hamilton Nolan said, that's a claim that is too good to fact check. And I think that is really indicative of the best of what Brother Trumka's legacy is: fighting for workers that are striking, fighting for workers that are fighting for themselves, and at the same time weaving that into a broader vision for how to make society better and more fair for working people. And so I wanted to spend today. We talked a couple weeks ago about the PRO Act and its potential to pass through reconciliation, and I mentioned that I wished we could go deeper into the PRO Act a couple of weeks ago, and so I wanted to take the time to do that today in honor of Brother Trumka and in honor of the fact that the passage of the PRO Act is really, since 2018, for the past several years, that has been the kind of number one thing. If you had seen Brother Trumka in public speaking about anything, he always weaved the passage of the PRO Act into whatever it was he was talking about, because he believed that it was, and I believe that it is, so important for working people to restructure the balance of power in our society from the owning class to the working class, because a class war has been waged on the part of employers for the past several decades, and they have been winning with the passage of Taft-Hartley, and every other labor law reform has been solely to further entrench the power of not workers, of owners, of bosses, and to decrease the power of workers and decrease our ability to organize. So then let's do that. Let's dive deep into what the PRO Act does. And this is still going to be a pretty high-level view, right? We're going to go much deeper than we did a couple of weeks ago, but it's still fairly high level. The best breakdown of the PRO Act that I have seen is on Brandon Magner's Substack. That's actually where I pulled a lot of what I tried to pull some of the things that I thought were most important and maybe most relevant. But if you want to see every single thing that the PRO Act does, the PRO Act is an amendment to the National Labor Relations Act. So what Brandon did on his Substack is he went through and read the PRO Act and he read the National Labor Relations Act, and every single place that there is a difference, every single place that the PRO Act changes the National Labor Relations Act, he notes it, and he gives you a bit of a history there. So it's really good. It is a fantastic breakdown of the PRO Act. So I highly recommend you going to Brandon Magner's Substack to read that full to read that full breakdown. So let's go ahead and start that. We've only got a couple minutes left here in this segment. We'll pick it up on the other side. The first thing to note is that it correctly defines employees and their ability to organize. So what does that mean? One, it attacks fissuring. Fissuring is where a large employer will subcontract out work. So Google, for example, subcontracts out so much of its work. It's janitorial work, it's secretary work, it's transportation work. A lot of it is subcontracted out. Amazon does the same thing. And so that makes it really difficult for workers to organize. Why does it make it difficult to organize under those conditions? And why does what does it mean that it's going to attack, the PRO Act is going to attack this problem? What is it going to solve? We're going to explain that further on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
Put it there, boy. We'll Show these fascists what a couple of hillbillies can do.
All power to the working class. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. We are talking about the PRO Act, diving deep into it in honor of our brother Richard Trumka, the president of the AFLCIO, who just passed away last week. It was very sudden. He had a very sudden heart attack. It was not expected at all, and so I can't imagine the pain that his family's going through. Sending our prayers, well wishes, and solidarity to everybody that was close to him, and to our brothers and sisters in the labor movement who lost a good leader. So let's talk about that. The first thing that I talked about is that it correctly defines employees, and so I mentioned that fissuring is that's something that employers do. They subcontract out work. So now let's say if the janitors at Google want to unionize, what they would have to do is unionize with the contractor that technically employs them. But we all know that the actual the person who actually employs them, right? The person who is the one that signs the checks, who is the one that actually has the power there, is Google. And so the PRO Act would allow it would create or recognize a joint employer status. And so the janitors would be unionizing at the contractor and at Google, and Google would have to bargain with them as if they unionize as a union. Google would have to bargain with them instead of just the contractor. And so that greatly increases their bargaining power there. It also attacks the exploitation of the independent contractor status. We all know that that Uber drivers are employees of Uber, and yet are the fiction of law in this country is that they are their own boss. Even though Uber decides every single thing about the context of their working hours as an Uber driver, the fiction, it is an absolute fiction. The fiction is that they are a boss. And so the PRO Act, it doesn't go all the way in saying that they are exactly like employees. It doesn't say that employers have to do this or that and treat them like employees. It only says that employers have to treat employees. Employers have to treat independent contractors like employees in the case where the independent contractors want to unionize. Right? Do you follow me?
That's huge.
Yeah. That's so that doesn't mean that all the other laws with employees and independent contractors, we can talk about whether or not that should be done in the future. But the fact is that the PRO Act does not do that, and there's a lot of misinformation out there about that, saying that the PRO Act would make independent contractor status illegal and you lose all the benefits of independent contractor status. That's not true. All the PRO Act does is allow independent contractors to collectively bargain. Okay, that's all it does. It's a very, very simple thing, but it's very good, and creates an environment where it is easier for independent contractors to use their leverage in the same way that other employees do. Okay. It also narrows the definition of supervisor, and this is important because employers, bosses, will define somebody as a supervisor when everybody knows they're not a supervisor, okay? And that's because the law as it is says that you can be defined as a supervisor if you have if in your job description it is to assign and you have a responsibility to direct. Okay, that's not how everybody. That's not how we perceive of supervisors. We perceive of supervisors, and really, what matters, the power that bosses have, is in their ability to hire and fire with their own independent judgment. And so, what the PRO Act does is it strikes those definitions from the definition of a supervisor, which allows more people to be in the bargaining unit. We actually just saw an example of this with our brother Brendan Bates in West Virginia, who was classified by his supposedly progressive environmental nonprofit as a supervisor, and thus could not be in the bargaining unit when they unionized with the IWW in West Virginia, and then they were fired. Brendan was fired. He was fired. And so the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, found that he was not, in fact, a supervisor, that he could be in the bargaining unit, and that his firing was illegal retaliation. But the PRO Act makes it more explicit what a supervisor is, and is more correct in the definition of what a supervisor is.
Just those two things alone are pretty big, because that's been one of the biggest trends, especially in the service industry. Retail is misclassifying workers in a way to diminish their power, really. You have folks at Sonic and at Dollar General who are glorified shift leads just because they're the one who has to count the money at the end of the night,
right? And
they're called supervisors. They can't hire anyone, they can't fire anyone. Most
certainly
cases,
don't have any control over the business.
Right, they have no control over the business. They're not at all tied to the profits of the store. They maybe make $1 or so more than the workers that they're quote unquote supervising. So that's a big shift in the right direction.
The PRO Act also repeals the Taft-Hartley Act's ban on the NLRB hiring economists. This is just like, why should the National Labor Relations Board not be able to hire economists? And it's probably one of the lesser-known shackles of the Taft-Hartley Act placed on the board, but it was an important one because the NLRB's economic division was a powerful tool in the past for studying industrial statistics and trends, and helped the board craft remedies accordingly. So that's an important one that I didn't know. Again, read Brandon's Substack. That's one that I didn't know that the PRO Act did until I read Brandon's piece on Substack.
And I have dropped that link in the comments of both YouTube and Facebook. So there's a couple of resources there. Check out Brandon's breakdown, and also check out passtheproact.org for more ways to get involved in this effort.
The PRO Act makes it an unfair labor practice for employers to undertake an offensive lockout of their workers. So under the current law, employers can lock out their workers as a bargaining tactic, as a negotiating tactic. The PRO Act makes that unlawful. The PRO Act makes it an unfair labor practice for employers to promise to, threaten to, or take action to permanently replace economic strikers. That is a huge, huge deal, because under current law, again, we just talked about there's so much in law that is just fiction. And the fiction is that you cannot fire striking workers. Well, you can permanently replace them. So you fired them, right? We all recognize that. So the PRO Act, it does away with this fiction and makes it a reality that you cannot. Not only can you not fire striking workers who are exercising their protected right to fight for better wages and working conditions, you cannot permanently replace them. You have to give them their job back once they want to come back on. And maybe some people would say, well, that infringes on the property rights of why shouldn't the employer be able to hire or fire whoever he wants? Like, who cares what the employer wants to do, okay? There are some laws, screw the employer, okay? Property rights is not the end-all be-all, okay? We have to think about what is going to make a better society for working people, what is going to be of the benefit of working people, and in this case, the benefit of working people is not to put in our laws property rights uber alles, okay? It just and
I think that's a big distinction here. Take away all the labels, left wing, right wing, Republican, Democrat. Do you think that human rights are more important than property rights?
Which is something that Teddy
Roosevelt,
which is something that Teddy Roosevelt, Republican, that everybody loves to talk about, he said that was one of his campaign things, like human rights over property rights. So we're going to be talking some more. I think we're going to be able to wrap up the PRO Act on the next segment. So make sure you stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. All wealth should go to labor. is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. We are breaking down the PRO Act. We're going deep into it with the help of Brandon Magner on Substack. So let's go right back into it. The PRO Act repeals the Taft-Hartley Act's ban on secondary boycotts, jurisdictional strikes, and recognitional picketing. This is huge because secondary strikes, sympathy strikes were a very, very big lever of power that workers had before the passage of Taft-Hartley. And so, what is a secondary strike? Well, let's say that you've got the mine workers in Brookwood. They are on strike right now. Well, they've got scabs going into the mine, traitors to their class, traitors to their brothers and sisters, traitors to their communities, but they're still going into the mines and they're putting coal out. Well, that coal has to be shipped somehow, and unfortunately, that coal is being shipped by union port workers in some case. Well, if the union port workers wanted to go on strike to support their brothers and sisters, current labor law says that's illegal. The current wrap your mind around this for a second. For the people who hold property rights sacrosanct, the law in this country prohibits workers from going on strike for whatever the hell reason they want to. You ought to be able to go on strike for whatever the hell reason you want to. The government shouldn't tell you when you can and can't work, how you should have to work. If you believe in property rights, if you believe in freedom, you should be for this provision of the PRO Act at least, because the banning of secondary and sympathy strikes is not a principled small government stance. It is, in fact, a big government stance prohibiting the freedom of workers for no other reason than to expand the power of the boss. The PRO Act also makes it an unfair labor practice for employers to force employees to attend captive audience meetings. Bosses shouldn't be able to coercively inform their employees of how they feel about unions. Okay, look, if you as a boss want to go find your workers on their own time and they're willing to talk to you on their own time about unions, I don't know why they would be willing to talk to you on their own time. I think, if somebody tried to come and talk to me and fill my head with anti-union nonsense on my own time, I'd tell them to go, get lost. But if you want to do that, that's fine. This is not a First Amendment violation. This is only saying that you cannot make it mandatory that your workers attend these nonsense anti-union meetings. Okay, that's all.
And that was a big part of the Amazon campaign in Bessemer, right, which many of you know that the National Labor Relations Board has recommended a do-over in the election. And part of the reason for that, in addition to the sketchy mailbox out front, was just the massive amount of anti-union tactics it deployed.
Which are legal.
Yeah, unfortunately, some of this is legal, and the captive audience meetings is one of those. And I'm sorry, but if you force people to sit in these meetings week after week after week, and lawyers and bosses threaten you and harass you and propagandize you, that does have an effect on people's votes.
And we know that every single conversation with a boss is laced with the implicit coercion, because it's not having a conversation with a boss is never the same as having a conversation with a coworker. Okay, like we're all adults. I think we've all had a job. We've all worked in the real world, right? We understand this. A conversation with your boss is not the same as a conversation with your coworker, and a suggestion from your boss is not the same as a suggestion from your coworker. Okay, we're all adults. Let's be adults. The PRO Act sets up rigorous standards for negotiating an initial contract up to and including interest arbitration. If the employer bargains in bad faith and does not award a first contract after a year, you could be looking at mandatory arbitration to make sure that workers get a first contract. We see this over and over. Even where workers win their unions, bosses will stall for years. I mean, the New Yorker, they won an amazing contract. We had an interview with them a couple of weeks ago, and you should go back and listen to it. They won an amazing contract, but it took them more than 3 years to get it. That's nonsense. The PRO Act would make it better. The PRO Act also repeals the Landrum-Griffin Act's ban on so-called hot cargo agreements. Prior to 1959, it was legal for employers and unions to negotiate provisions in collective bargaining agreements that prohibited the employer from handling or working with any product coming from another company with whom the union has a labor dispute. Okay, so here again, the Landrum-Griffin Act is the big government coming in and telling employers and unions what they can and can't agree to. Previously, unions could bargain for the ability to say, put in their contract that the employer is not going to transport goods. Like, it would make it so for these port workers, in the case of this coal, the port workers could have previously put in their contract, if the employer agreed to it, we will absolutely not. It would be against our contract to ship this coal. But the government now says that you can't agree to that as a boss. The government now says you can't agree to that as a boss. That is not upholding property rights. That is not upholding freedom for the boss or for the worker. More importantly, in my view, for the worker. But still, the boss has a freedom there too. The boss could say, no, I don't want to put that in the contract. And but the government is saying, no, you can't put in that in your contract. The PRO Act also makes it an unfair labor practice for employers to force their employees into mandatory arbitration agreements that waive those employees' right to bring or join class action lawsuits. It also makes it an unfair labor practice for employees to threaten, retaliate, or coerce their employees from bringing or joining such suits. This is an important thing because, we've seen these clauses in contracts are proliferating. National or non-disclosure agreements, and just making as a condition of your employment, waiving away your constitutional rights to get compensation for being done wrong. You just waive that away as a condition of your employment. The PRO Act makes that illegal.
And that was one of the things that our sister from the New Yorker Union told us they had to fight for.
Yep.
So if that was something that wasn't even on the table, they could have spent that time and energy, fighting for wages, working conditions, any number of practices. But instead, it's unfortunate. That's something we have to fight for. And that's something, we've even had listeners call in and tell us about looking at prospective jobs and going through interviews and then being presented with these types of mandatory arbitration and non-disclosure type agreements that are just total BS.
Yep. The next provision is something that Michael Yaffe, I don't know, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, right? He probably just doesn't understand. He's not a union guy. He's not a labor guy. This isn't the thing that he does. This is not the thing that he digs into. But I corrected him, and he doubled down. Okay, so he obviously didn't do the reading on that afterwards. The PRO Act would certify a union through card check in elections. Here's the catch. All he heard, and a lot of conservative talk radio fearmongers hear, is the PRO Act would certify a union through card check in elections. Okay, well, but there are stipulations there. When does that happen? That happens when the employer committed an unfair labor practice, broke the law, or otherwise interfered with a fair election, and the employer did not demonstrate that the violation or other form of interference was unlikely to have affected the outcome of the election. So two conditions have to be met right here, right? The workers have to have said before the election by more than 50% majority that they want a union. They signed the authorization card saying we want union representation. That's the first one. That's the first condition. And the second condition is that the employer over the course of the union election breaks the law. And not only do they have to break a law, they have to break the law in such a way that it materially affects the outcome of the election. Like, they have to prove that, okay, yeah, sure, we broke the law, but it didn't affect the outcome of the election ultimately. They can even still break the law and this doesn't happen. They can even still break the law and it doesn't happen. But if they break the law and they cannot prove that their breaking of the law was immaterial to the outcome of the election, then the union is certified through card check. Okay? If you're for law and order, this is a good provision for you. The PRO Act removes the offset rule for back pay awards. It is illegal to fire a worker for union for being pro or anti-union. You can't do that. If you fire them, you have to hire them on with back pay. Okay, that sounds pretty good. But here's the catch. If the worker, over the course of the years that it can take to arbitrate this, for this to work its way through the courts, if the worker has taken a job, then the money that they earn through their new job is offset. Okay, so if you work at Walmart fires you for being pro-union, and I get a job somewhere else, the income that I get at the other job is deducted from the back pay that Walmart owes me. That's nonsense. That means most of the time they don't actually have to pay out back pay. It's insane. It's a terrible rule. The PRO Act removes it. The PRO Act also removes the NLRB's inability to order non-remedial damages for unfair labor practices, and it removes the NLRB's inability to order relief for undocumented workers. The NLRB does not have the ability to issue fines and things like that, and it doesn't have the ability to issue any kind of relief for undocumented workers. Okay, the PRO Act changes that. It gives them an ability to issue fines and things like that, and it expands the enforcement mechanisms of the National Labor Relations Board to undocumented workers. The PRO Act would also make ignoring NLRB orders punishable by $10,000 per day for each separate unfair labor practice. So we've got just a couple more things in the PRO Act, and then we're going to go on to the next segment. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This is the Valley Labor Report. We will be right back to finish breaking down the PRO Act and talk about the coal miners in Brookwood. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with Jacob Morrison.
Let's go! Solidarity forever. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. We are breaking down the PRO Act today on the show.
Yeah, so something that really stands out to me that I feel compelled to say is that this legislation, if you've been listening, hopefully you've picked up that this legislation is not radical. This is not, the workers seizing the means of production here.
Right.
It's a pretty, a pretty compromise type of piece of legislation. And the fact that so many would even see it as a radical change is really just indicative of how far the tables have turned over the past, 70, 80 years, really, when it comes to labor law. Right. And I think it's fitting. We're talking about this on the anniversary of President Ronald Reagan busting the air traffic controller strike, and that was not just a symbolic action. It was certainly very harmful to those workers, and it destroyed that union and damaged their lives. But it was a symbolic victory for the bosses against the working class, and we've seen unionization decline ever since then. It's one of those high water marks in history. So the PRO Act, what that is this. Like I said, what it seems like a very fair, reformist type of legislation that really just tries to even the odds just a bit. Nothing too extreme here. This is just giving unions and workers seeking unions a little bit more of a fair shake, because as it stands now, the law is absolutely rigged for employees. Right. I mean, for employers.
And a lot of this is really just going back to the law of the land before this absolute assault on worker power. I mean, you notice when I'm going through, I'm saying this overturns Taft, this part of the act overturns this part of Taft-Hartley. This part of the act overturns this part of Landon-Griffin. I mean, there's all of these laws, every single change to labor law in this country since the NLRA basically was to benefit employers. And so really when I say that this law it restructures the balance of power to make it more fair, that's really all that it is. It's not radical. It really just makes it more fair.
And that's so important because as it stands now, companies, whether it's Amazon or even, smaller companies in your community, can cheat, they can lie, they can steal, and they can get away with it.
Yep.
A ULP is very much a nasty gram posted on their door. It comes with very little material consequences. And so that's insane that we have allowed it to get to that point. I think that, again, is indicative of, our decline as workers and our power in this country. So the PRO Act is just, one step. It's certainly not a silver bullet to solve all of our problems, but it would be a nice way to have more of a fair shake in terms of the law in this country.
Right. So let's get these last few points in, and we'll go on to the update on the coal miners' strike. The PRO Act renders National Labor Relations Board orders as self-enforcing. I mean, this is, here again, I'm going back to the fiction, just the absurdity of the way that the law is right now. The NLRB orders are not self-enforcing. If an employer doesn't want to abide by the rules of the NLRB, he can just not abide by the rules of the NLRB, and he has to wait for a circuit court to enforce them. This makes the orders of the NLRB the executor of the labor law in this country. Makes them self-enforcing, and it makes it such that an employer can only not follow the orders if a circuit court comes in and says that that's not valid. So
imagine that, employers having to follow the law.
Oh,
like the rest
crazy.
of us average people.
Yeah. The PRO Act also authorizes civil penalties for employer unfair labor practices and for violating the Act's workplace notice posting rule and voter lists rule, and it creates personal liability for civil penalties for employers, directors, and officers. That means if you're a boss on the job breaking the law at the behest of Amazon, you are going to incur some amount of personal liability there that maybe will incentivize you to not break the law on behalf of your feudal overlord. That might be something you want to consider. The PRO Act also includes intermittent strikes, slowdowns, and partial strikes as protected concerted activity. Section 7 of the NLRA has a list of what is protected concerted activity. What are activities that you cannot be fired for, okay? These would be included in that list, and that's very important. It adds to the list of tools that workers have in their toolbox. Intermittent strikes, slowdowns, and partial strikes. Very good stuff. The PRO Act would repeal all state-level right-to-work laws. What does that mean? Remember, folks, we've gone over this so many times. If you don't know what right to work is after you listen to this show for so long, you need to find somebody. You need to go and review. We've done a lot of clips on it. The one that we dove most into about right to work was with Daniel Harris. It's been several months ago, but it was a really good one. It was the title was Right to Work Must Die. Really quick, what is right to work? Right to work is the government interfering in private negotiations between two private parties, the union and the employer, and saying you can't have a clause that says everybody that works here and benefits from union representation has to pay representation fees. It is coercion. Right to work laws are coercion. They are big government coming in and telling people what they can and can't do. The PRO Act repeals them. The PRO Act also requires employers to disclose to the Department of Labor any outside consultants they hire to fight union organizing campaigns. Doesn't say they can't hire them, just says you got to let people know about it.
And there is a cottage industry out there of lawyers and union busters who are very well paid to come in and harass, intimidate, and lie to workers all over this country to try to prevent unions, to try to sow dissent within unions. It's pretty disgusting, and I think that's a very mild, moderate ask that they at least have to report that.
Yep. The PRO Act adds whistleblower protections to the labor management relations and something Act, LMRDA, and that's important. I think people should be able to blow the whistle on things when their employer is not doing something good. So that's the PRO Act. That's a big deep dive, and even in that deep dive, like, gosh, I've spent like the last hour on it. That's crazy. I still left stuff out, so you got to read Brandon's Substack. That's what I'm telling you. Okay, this whole hour has just been an ad for Brandon's Substack. You got to read it, folks. You got to read it. And I also talked a couple of weeks ago about what could make it through reconciliation. The International Association of Bricklayers and Allied Crafts, they cut my ramblings down to 2 minutes, put a really cool animation to it. So you should follow them on Twitter and watch that. See, because all of this, all right, senators, Democratic senators, Cinema Mansion, if you want to honor our brother Richard Trumka, who died last week, who his last several years was fighting for the passage of the PRO Act, you got to pass this law in its entirety. Okay? Pass it in its entirety, and if it takes the elimination of the filibuster, then you do it. If you're not willing to do that, then keep his name out of your mouth. Okay? Keep his name out of your mouth. If you're not willing to eliminate the PRO Act, to eliminate the filibuster, to pass the PRO Act, keep Brother Trumka's name out of your mouth.
Amen.
Okay? But we still may not be able to get that done, so parts of it can make it through reconciliation, and we went through that the other day. So you should go and take a look at that, the Bricklayers Union on Twitter. If you want to see what we're up to throughout the week and get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/The Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. And if you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, you can search YouTube for The Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we clip segments and release them throughout the week. We do upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps. So to see if we are on your listening platform of choice, you can go to thevalleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe. We've got a website where you can buy our hats and stickers. That's thevalleylaborreport.org. We've only got 2 hats left. We are down to 2 hats. So the next 2 people that order a hat will be the last folks that get one. I don't know when we're going to get another round. So if you want one of those hats, go ahead and place your order, thevalleylaborreport.org. And finally, if you appreciate our work and want to help us stay on the air, then the best way that you can do that is throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report.